Hello everyone, this video is going to be a walkthrough of a couple of questions using our musculoskeletal system section in our CPT manual. Normally I just do the CPT codes, but this video is going to also include a few ICD-10 codes, just because there are a few unusual circumstances or tricky scenarios that I wanted to review with you all. So it'll be a little bit longer video, but not too much. All right, so as always, feel free to pause the video and try to answer the question yourself, and then follow along with the walkthrough, and make sure you are taking notes in your manual, writing things down, particularly when I'm talking about unique phrases or diagnoses or terms. Those are things that you want to have notes about in your manual, okay? All right, so let's get into it. First question. Patient slipped on the ice and twisted her knee when she fell. During diagnostic arthroscopy, a bucket-handled tear of the medial and lateral meniscus was seen and repaired. So there's a lot going on here, and it is a little bit tricky. So I wanted to kind of highlight a few things that we want to pull out of this description, this documentation, in order to select the best code. So the first thing I've highlighted is slipped on the ice. That's going to let you know that we can use an external cause code. That's from our ICD-10 CM manual. And that is a code that will just provide us some extra information about how the patient sustained that injury. They are not always mandatory, but they are useful. And if you see a description, a documentation like this on the national exam, a phrase like slipped on the ice, fell off a horse, bumped their head in the kitchens, anything that specific is usually going to indicate to you that there's an external cause code in the answer. So I would look for the answers that have external cause codes added to them. And those usually start with like a W. Okay, so that's the first thing. She fell on the ice, and then we have a diagnostic arthroscopy. So that's telling us something about the procedure itself, our CPT code. This one's still a little tricky, so we will get into that in a second. And then it says, during this arthroscopy, a bucket-handled tear of the medial and lateral meniscus was seen and repaired. So what does that tell us? That tells us two things. One, there were two separate tears. So we have a bucket handle tear on the medial and lateral portion of the meniscus. So that's going to be two separate diagnoses, right? Even though we're just doing one arthroscopy, one procedure code, we're still going to have two diagnosis codes because we have a bucket handle tear of the medial and lateral portion of the meniscus, okay? So that's giving us some information there. The other thing that this is showing us is we did actually perform a surgical procedure. So even though our documentation states we did a diagnostic arthroscopy, we actually did a surgical arthroscopy, right? So if you are doing a diagnostic procedure and then identify the problem and immediately repair that problem or address that problem during that diagnostic procedure, it is no longer a diagnostic procedure. It is now a surgical procedure. And I'll show you in the manual how we can kind of justify that. But that's what I wanted to point out here, because that probably would be the easiest thing to slip up on if you're coding the CPT portion of this. All right. So what we know as we look into our manuals is our CPT code is going to be a surgical arthroscopy for the repair of the medial and lateral meniscus. And then we know that our ICD-10 codes are going to be two codes for bucket handle tears, one for the medial meniscus, one for the lateral meniscus. And then we are going to have an external cause code for slipped on the ice. All right. So if you want to pause right now and try to find those codes, now would be a great time. But I'm going to switch over to our document camera and we will look it up together. All right. So here we are with our 2022 CPT manual, as always, tabbed. We've tabbed it to the musculoskeletal system. And we are looking for these codes. So our CPT code is going to be arthroscopy of the knee, and we're looking for one that specifies the repair of medial and lateral meniscus, or if we have to, separate out a medial and a lateral meniscus, okay? So we are going to flip up to the musculoskeletal system, and if you did not know that this is the location of these codes, when you saw that arthroscopy was the service, then you could definitely come back to the index back here and look it up, and there it would direct you over here. But we are looking for arthroscopy. So while this section is set up with a general section and then it goes head to toe, you'll notice that there is not a section just for knees, but there is a section for arthroscopies, endoscopy and arthroscopy here at the back, okay? Very last section. So we're going to look at page 212. And this is where our section begins. And what I wanted to point out here is this area I've put in brackets. This kind of gives us that justification I was talking about, where I said we had a diagnostic arthroscopy, but we did performed a surgical procedure. So now it's a surgical arthroscopy. Here in the description of this section, it states surgical endoscopy or arthroscopy always includes a diagnostic endoscopy. So that means that even if we are performing a surgical procedure, a surgical endoscopy or arthroscopy, we are still performing a diagnostic procedure. So that is still included. It's wrapped up in that code, okay? All right. So we are going to look in this section for arthroscopy of the knee. And then we are going to try to see if there's any more specific code that's going to help us, okay? So this section is arranged by body part again. So just like the rest of this chapter. So you'll see it's arthroscopy, and then it specifies which portion of the body, you know, if we're looking at shoulder, and then it goes on from there, diagnostic, surgical, and so on. So we're going to look for knee. Okay. It looks like knee starts over here. This includes some graphs. And over on page 215, we get into arthroscopy of the knee diagnostic. So this is what I'm guessing if you were coding this problem on your own and made a mistake, this is probably most likely what you would have picked, is this diagnostic arthroscopy code. But we are going to look for the surgical code, which is right here. And remember, for this code, everything this is going to be like our parent code. Everything before the semicolon is going to apply to all the codes that are indented underneath, okay? You'll see all these codes are indented. And so everything before the semicolon applies. So this is arthroscopy knee, surgical for infection, lavage, and drainage. So we don't have any documentation to indicate lavage and drainage. So we're going to keep going down. Lateral release, no. Removal of foreign body, no. Abrasion, no. This is for the removal of the meniscus. That's not correct. Okay, and then we get here to 29882, and it includes with meniscus repair, medial or lateral portion. All right. So 29882 is very close, but it says medial or lateral, which makes me believe we pick one or the other. However, the code underneath it, 29883, is with meniscus repair, medial and lateral. So to me, that is a better selection, 29883. okay, because that includes both the medial and lateral repair. It's a surgical arthroscopy. It includes the diagnostic, because we have learned in our guidance for this section. So it kind of touches on everything. Now, if we didn't have this code, if we didn't have something that addressed medial and lateral, most likely we would go to 29882 and report it twice for medial, or if it's indicating that it can only be used once for medial or lateral. Okay. But luckily we do have this code, which makes it very simple. Okay. We're going to look around and check and make sure there's no other guidance for this section. There's no symbols or anything like that that's telling us we need to add anything else. We could read the parenthetical guidance. It's discussing meniscal transplantation. That's not something we're doing. So we do not have to follow that guidance. Okay. So we are just going to report this code, and that is going to be our procedure code. All right. And then we are going to check out our ICD-10. So here we are with that. And we are going to be looking for these 3 separate codes. All right. So as always, we are going to start in our alpha. And if we don't know exactly where we're going, I would just start with the word tear. That would be our main term here. And then I would look at meniscus tear. Okay, so that's kind of where I'm starting at. That would be my first inclination. You might think something else. And, you know, this is so well cross-referenced, we might end up at the same place. But I'm going to start with tear. That seems the easiest for me. Because everything else is describing a tear, right? Okay, so tear is on, if you can see it. All right. Page 450. And we are going to look for meniscus. And here it is. Oh, sorry, here we go. Here it is, meniscus knee, and it's directing you to S83.209. And then some of the indented terms, the very first one is bucket handle. So that's a really good sign, right? And that's saying S83.20, which seems like those would be in the same category. And then underneath that, even more specific, is lateral, and then that's indented further to bucket handle. So lateral bucket handle tear, that's exactly what we're looking for here. And that's going to send us to S83.25. And then a little bit further down here, it says medial, and then indented further there is bucket handle as well. So medial bucket handle tear is going to be S83.21. All right, so we are going to go to this S83 section, and we are going to find what further guidance we need. And we already know we definitely need additional characters because we have this red stop sign. But regardless, even if we did not have that, we would still go check. All right, so S83 starts on 1348. This is the top of the section, and this is really important to check out before you start coding from the section, because it does give you quite a bit of guidance. And the really important thing to see here is this guidance here. It's going to say that every code from category S83 is going to require a 7th character. It's going to be A, D, or S. So it's going to be initial encounter, subsequent encounter, sequela. As far as we know, this was a diagnostic procedure that turned into a surgical procedure. During that diagnostic procedure, we diagnosed these tears. So this would be an initial encounter for everything we're dealing with, right? Okay, so we are looking for S83.21. And that is on 1349. Put an arrow here for you all. So S83.21. And we do not know which knee was injured. So we will be picking S83.219. So if you look at each of these codes, you'll see the only difference is that it's for right knee, left knee, or unspecified, but all of them are bucket handle of medial meniscus, which is what we are coming to look for, is this S83.21. And then we're just specifying which knee. And since we do not know which knee, we will do the unspecified knee. So 0.219. Now, again, we can't stop here because we know we need to add a DRS. And as we already discussed, all of these are going to be initial encounter. So this will be our 7th character. That will be an A. All right, so now let's look at SE 3.25. And that is right here. And again, it's the same code. It's just specified for the lateral meniscus. And then we do right knee, left knee, or unspecified. Now we want unspecified. So that is going to be SED 3.259. And again, RA for that section. Okay. So now all we need to do is find our external cause code. And you should have a tab at that section. If you don't, it is after our neoplasms table. Go ahead and put a tab there. Not going to hurt you. And everything in this section, which starts on 604 in this manual anyway, is going to be in alphabetical order. And we're looking at fall. You could do fall or slipping. Since I'm on S, we can just do slipping. Here's slipping. We'll see if it directs us somewhere else. Okay. Accidental on same level with fall. So this is telling us slipping would be considered something that's on the same level. We're not falling down a step or stepping off a curb or anything like that. I'm guessing this kind of situation would be you're in the parking lot and you slipped. So it's all on the same level. And then it specifies down here on ice. So we are going to look at W 0.0. And then it specifies even further if it was with skates, and we did not have any information that it was with skates. So we're just going to go look up this code here and see if there's any further characters. Let's see. Okay. So back to the manual and our W's. Here we are. WOO. And this section again wants us to have a 7th character with A, D, or S as our 7th character. And it looks like W00.0 is fall on the same level due to ice, which we already established is how we defined slipping. And so that will be our code. And then we need to have a 7th character. So we need to have some placeholders here. And as you can see, it's already telling us we need placeholders because there's the X. So we will add 2 placeholders and an A to indicate this is our initial encounter. All right. So those are the codes that we are going to use to answer this problem. Let's go back and look at the PowerPoint and double check. All right. 29883, S83.219A, S83.259A, and W00.0 XXA. We did it, y'all. Okay, so that was a big one. And I think our next one is hopefully going to be a little bit easier, but it's going to look more intimidating because we are looking at a report. All right. So we have this big giant report. It's a lot. So let me just pull out, instead of reading you all of this stuff, let me pull out the key issues that we're looking at. So we have a patient with deltoid muscle pain and swelling. That's the preoperative and postoperative diagnosis. They also have come in on a ventilator. And then we have performed a muscle biopsy of the left deltoid. Okay. Now this is a lot of information about how we closed, how we opened, sterile dressing, the patient tolerated the procedure well, and all of that. We accounted for all of our sponges and everything. The main thing that I want to take away from this is this deltoid muscle pain and swelling is going to be called myositis. And if you have not taken medical terminology or anything like that, this would be pretty hard to find or figure out with all of this documentation here. So I'm just telling you, I would write that down in your manual, probably in your ICD-10 somewhere, that the swelling of a muscle like the deltoid is called myositis. Okay. And so that will help you pick the code easier whenever you are looking for your ICD-10 code. And so what we are looking at here for our CPT is all we did in this whole long note is a muscle biopsy to figure out what was going on with the muscle. Okay. So all we've done is a muscle biopsy. For the ICD-10, we are going to have myositis of the deltoid, which is the shoulder. And we also want to include on that the patient was on a ventilator. All right. Anytime it's mentioned that a patient is currently on a ventilator, we would code that Z code for dependence on a ventilator. Okay. That just gives us more information about the patient. It also demonstrates that the procedure was riskier than maybe a traditional procedure. And it would also explain any complications that may have arose during surgery. All right. So we are going to go check out our manuals. If you want to pause right now, this is a great time, and see if you can find it yourself. All right. So we are looking for a muscle biopsy. Now, if you do not know where muscle biopsy is, because it is a little confusing when you look here in our table of contents, there's not a section that says biopsy in here. And so that could get kind of confusing. It could be in other procedures, there's not, maybe in shoulder, it gets a little confusing where you would be doing that. So if you want to look in your index, this is one of those times I would probably look in the index if I didn't know exactly where I was going. And we're going to look at biopsy, and then we're going to look for muscle. Okay. Here at the back on page 1049 is where we get to muscle. And that is directing us to codes 20200 to 20206. So we know we are in the right section, but this just gives us the right code range. So you can see that. Oh, I don't know if you can see that. Let's see here. Yeah. So that gives us the right code range. It makes it a little bit easier, I think. So if you were totally confused, didn't know where you were going, instead of just wandering around the musculoskeletal system, which is a really big section, you can come to the back and look there. Okay, so they said 20200. Okay. And that is in our excision section in the general. The very first section of musculoskeletal system is kind of our general section. And in the excision is where we have our biopsies, our biopsy codes, all right? And right here at the top, 20200 is biopsy of muscle, superficial and deep. And then this one includes a percutaneous needle. And then we get into bone. We did not, if you read through the documentation, we just did a muscle biopsy. It was not superficial though. How do we know that? We were doing all kinds of sutures. We were cutting through fascia, things like that. You could tell we were going through different structures. So we are looking at a deep muscle biopsy. So superficial would be very, very simple. But we are looking at a deep muscle biopsy. So this is the code we're going to use, 20205. And then we kind of look around, we make sure there's no other guidance here. We don't see any further guidelines that would help us select a different code or indicate we need an additional code. So that is the code that we're going to use. All right. And then we're going to go look at our ICD-10. Again, myositis is what we're looking at. Make a note of it. Do a little research into it so you know when to use it. Or if you see that phrase in the future, you will know what it means, okay? All right, so we are going to start here in our alpha, go to myositis. Okay. Myositis starts on page 355 at the bottom. Sorry, I was getting a little bit lost there. There's a lot of very similar words. It starts at 355 at the bottom, and we are going to look to see if there's anything that indicates where it is. Okay, so we are looking for one that is in the shoulder, and we don't have any information of being ossifying, specified type, and then shoulder region right here should get us where we need to go. So we're looking at M60.81. And this one is tricky, you guys. So if you didn't get this, like, I don't blame you at all because it's kind of tricky. And then we already know we have a red stop sign, but regardless, we're going to go ahead and double check it. But this is really difficult because there's so many different kinds. Well, one, there's a lot of terms that are super close, right? And if you didn't know myositis, you're probably still looking at swelling or pain or trying to code two codes for swelling and pain. And then we've got all these different types of myositis. So we know it's a specified type and location. And so we're going to look at the shoulder region myositis. Okay. So M60.81. And let's go check that out. Okay. M60. .8 other myositis. So all the others were really specific, ossifying and foreign granula and all kinds of different things like that. We have other myositis and we are looking at 8.1. So of the shoulder. We are looking at the left shoulder. I believe. I might have to change that, but I'm pretty sure we're looking at the left shoulder, M60.812. Okay, and we don't have any further guidance here. Obviously, we can't use M60.81 by itself, so we have to specify further. But otherwise, we don't have any other guidance here, so that is what we're going to stick with, M60.812, okay? Then our next one is going to be ventilator. So if we go back to our alpha and go to dependence, that's going to be another really big section, but I think it's going to be easier to find it. And that's going to be a Z code, I can already tell you. So dependence starts on 195. And we are going to look for ventilator. Okay, so on page 197, we have dependence on ventilator. If you can see that. And that's sending us to Z99.11. All right, we're going to go check that one out and see if we need to change anything or add anything else. But yeah, the important thing there is if you see any mention of a ventilator, you're probably going to want to code it. Or at least check if you're doing the national exam, check to make sure that the answer you selected had dependence on a ventilator on there. As long as they're actively dependent on that ventilator. Okay. C99.11, dependence on a ventilator. That's their status. So it's just a status code. And there's no other guidance here saying we need to change the code or add anything to it or use an additional code. Right. So we don't have, this does not apply to us. So that's what we're going to use, Z99.11. All right, let's go back and double check. I want to make sure I had the right shoulder listed. Yes, it said left, so that's good. I totally blanked on which shoulder it was, but it was left. Okay, so we have 20205, M60.812, and Z99.11. That one is really tricky, just because I think of the myositis, that term. So I would make a note of that, read up on it a little bit, so that way you know when to use that or what that phrase means if you do see it somewhere in the future. Okay, so those are the only two I'm going through today. If you have any other questions, please feel free to leave a comment in the discussion and we can go over some more examples. Thank you all. Bye-bye.